Welcome to the What Was Good podcast with Zach and Skylar. On today's 2003 special edition bonus episode, we're going to be talking about one of Zach's favorite movies from that year, the Tim Burton feature Big Fish. As always, if you want to get a hold of us, you can reach out by email at whatwasgoodpod@gmail.com or find us on Twitter/X at whatwasgoodpod. Hope you enjoy the show, and we'd love to hear from you with your thoughts.
Hey everybody, welcome into the What Was Good podcast with me, Zach, and my co-host,
Skylar. Hey guys. And girls. And anyone who wants to listen.
Absolutely, you could be a cow for all we know, but it's kind of weird to have access to it.
You could have chosen like any other animal than cow.
You could be a capybara. You could be my son's favorite animal, but no,
maybe my dog is going to listen to this one.
yeah, who knows. Anyway, we're here for a 2003 bonus episode today, and this was my pick, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But we got a few things to discuss first, I think.
Well, let's go back to 2003 for a minute. I remember on a past episode we talked about Harry Potter, the book, in 2003 being extremely popular, and Zach and I went back and forth like, oh, maybe we should try to read Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which came out in 2003 for our bonus episode. And then I pulled it off my bookshelf and saw that it was like 800 pages or something like that.
I actually checked out the audio book for our long trip that we were going to be taking. It was 19 CDs. So I was like, they're only like an hour long each, but I was like, I don't want to keep changing the CDs in and out. So it was, we didn't even start it.
Yeah, I think that was maybe trying to bite off a little bit more than we can chew. Just finishing the books for our regular episodes is tough enough. So we went with a movie. And there's a lot of good options to choose from in 2003 that we haven't yet talked about.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously we talked about all the award winners and everything, but the one we did go with didn't win any awards, actually. Not even anything outside of the Academy Awards. But it was one of my favorites, so we'll get into Big Fish in a little bit here. So I got to bring this up. We talked a lot about 2003 being the year that a lot of good movies, obviously, but also the year that your first child was born.
Indeed.
It's now 2024. So if my math is correct, your son is now 21 years old.
That is correct. Actually, his birthday is today. So I'm on my way down to his college town to have dinner with him. It was going to be the whole family, but the other two that currently live at my house are both sick, so it's going to be just me. But hey, we'll still go down, have a nice dinner. He'll come up here this weekend and we'll celebrate because his mother's birthday is on Wednesday. So this week has always been very busy for the last 21 years.
Last 21 years, yeah. So you now have like an official, like, old enough to drink alcohol child. How does that make you feel?
It feels pretty good. It feels pretty normal. I think the hardest change was when he moved out of the house to go to college. That was a shocker. But now I'm really proud of this kid. It's good to see him grow up, and I'm excited to spend the evening with him. We were going to record this tonight, but I was like, I'd rather not talk to... I mean, I love my brother. Zach's great. But, not every night.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, that's cool. You can wish him happy birthday from me as well, because I probably won't be giving him a call tonight.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah. Oh. So, what else is going on? Anything important?
No. Although I am really enjoying the baseball playoffs.
Go Tigers.
Go Tigers. I'm also a bandwagon Phillies fan because I got a good friend who's a Phillies fan and got to watch a thrilling game last night where they were winning and then blew it and then came back in the bottom of the ninth to actually win it. So go Phillies. And also Saturday night, I watched Big Fish, but had to stop it about, 2/3 of the way through because I realized my beloved University of Washington Huskies were playing the hated Michigan Wolverines in a rematch of the national championship game last year. So I turned off the movie, turned on the game for the fourth quarter, watched UW win, and then went back to Big Fish. It was a great night all around on Saturday, I'll say.
It's so weird that UW is in the Big Ten now. That's just
I don't want to talk about that.
okay. That's I guess that's not the important part here. But UW winning that rematch of last year, and now both teams have already lost twice this year. That's crazy to me that these are the two finalists last year, and they're both 4-2 now.
Well, with the way that college football works now, they're completely different teams, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Half the players move to another team. A lot of kids graduate and go to the NFL. So it's hardly the same two teams outside of their logos. And, well, with UW, not even their coach.
Yeah.
Their coach went to Alabama, who then
Who
lost
also
to Vanderbilt
lost.
on Saturday. Man, that was such a good day.
It was a good day. But yeah, being here in Oregon now, we get to see the classic matchup of Oregon and Ohio State this next weekend, the number 2 and 3 teams in the country. So that'll be kind of interesting that it's a in division game for them this year. So
yeah, I've got a friend who's a professor at Ohio State. He, since he was 18, has never left Ohio State. Went there for undergrad, went there for grad school. Immediately after grad school, got a job on a professor track at Ohio State. So he was actually the student section cheerleader when he was there. So this is a diehard Ohio State fan, and I texted him right after Washington won on Saturday that, like, sorry we couldn't do this in January because, of course, as Ohio State, he hates the Michigan Wolverines.
yes,
So, like, sorry we couldn't do this in January, but we'll take a win over Michigan tonight. Please defeat Oregon for us next week.
See, now I have some friends who are Michigan State fans, and they were still, even though they hate Michigan intensely, they were still cheering for Michigan last year over Washington in the national championship game.
I mean, that's fair. There's school affiliation, then there's regional affiliation, then there's maybe league affiliation, although now everything's Big Ten, so that maybe
Yeah.
it's not so important. But, I get it.
Yeah. There's our sports segment with Zach and Skylar.
Tune in next week for us to discuss,
Why the Seahawks suck.
oh, well, we can get there. So as we're revisiting 2003, we were talking about the movies to choose. There's a lot of movies that came out in 2003.
There is.
Kill Bill that we didn't talk about, Finding Nemo, School of Rock, which is one of my absolute favorites, Love Actually, Elf. I mean, this was probably in the heart of my movie watching at home career. So so many of these I've seen and loved, but Zach chose one that I've seen once at that time, but not since then. 2003's Big Fish. So, Zach, tell us about the movie and why you chose it.
Okay, so I had a list of movies that I was going through for what we could possibly choose, and the first one jumped out for me was Elf, just because it's such a classic, and it's now like the modern Christmas movie. Like that's the last one I can remember that was still watched to this day. Like everybody watches that. So I thought, man, everybody knows that movie already. Everybody knows the whole story. We're not going to have any original thoughts on that or anything. So I pushed Elf out, even though that was my first choice. And then I looked at some of the other options, and I realized, oh, Big Fish is 2003. I loved this movie when I first saw it, and shortly after I was married, we watched this movie together, and I was reminded just how good it was. And then we watched it again this week, and I was reminded just how good it was. So I'm really glad we picked this movie. It's essentially the story of a guy saying, I once caught a fish this big, but the fish is his entire life. I know that's a weird way to put it, but everybody's had that where someone's describing something to them where there's no possible way it could be as amazing as they're describing it. But this movie takes that idea and just runs with it. It makes these huge, tall tales about this man's life and all the amazing things he went through, and it's kind of done through the portrayal of telling it to his son, which his son has heard it thousands of times, and his son's wife, who's pregnant in the movie, and just all of the relationship between the father and son there, which is a huge story plot. But kind of all the interesting, amazing, tall tales that his dad lived through and all the crazy people he met along the way. Because really, this boils down to the people of the movie. And it's a lot of fun and a little bit longer movie. I mean, it was right about 2 hours, but it's one of my favorites from 2003 outside of Return of the King, obviously, and a couple others. But this is right at the top of my list.
Interesting. So, like I said, I think I watched this back in 2003 or 2004 at home, probably holding my infant son in my arms. And my memory of it was that it was okay.
It's
Just
fair.
didn't really land for me at the time. There's a lot of father son stuff in this.
Yes, for sure.
And so now I have an adult son. And watching it again in 2024, it actually struck me the same way. Like, it's
Okay.
fine, but I don't love it.
That's fair. It's not for everybody. I mean, it's essentially a fairy tale. That's what it is. And I mean, if that's not your cup of tea, then fine. I just felt like the actors in it were such characters that it made it a lot of fun. Like we've got Steve Buscemi's in it, Danny DeVito, Ewan McGregor is the main, I guess the main character. I mean, there's an old version of him played by Albert Finney as well. But it's just got a lot of fun characters that just make it entertaining to watch.
I will say that Ewan McGregor I love Ewan McGregor, right?
Yeah.
He's maybe not the best at an Alabama Southern accent.
That's fair.
Just throwing that out there.
But how is Albert Finney with the accent?
So I loved Albert Finney. I think he was my favorite character or actor in the movie because he plays the same character, Edward Bloom. Well, he plays the real Edward Bloom, and Ewan McGregor plays the fairy tale Edward Bloom, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I agree. This is a fairy tale. I love fairy tales. There's a lot of great fairy tale movies. I love Labyrinth. It's one of my all-time favorites. That's a fairy tale. So it's not the fairy tale stuff that doesn't land for me. So you said it's fun, and there are a lot of fun characters, but there's, to me, a core of like hopelessness and darkness in it that, for me, like overshadows everything because I see it as them telling these stories not because they're fun, but because Edward Bloom is about to die. And so the whole thing is tinged with this darkness, which is maybe on purpose. I don't know, but for me that I didn't have a lot of fun watching it.
See, well, I think the premise being that the son's name is Will. He's played by Billy Crudup. Is that how you say that last name?
That's how I would say it.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, the premise is that the son's heard these stories thousands of times. So it's not like he's only telling these stories on his deathbed, which he's pretty convinced he's not dying yet. But so this is nothing new to the son. These are all the same stories he's heard over and over. He's just got a new person to tell them to, which being his wife, his pregnant wife in this story. She's only probably heard a few of them, but
Will's pregnant wife.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. So it's kind of just a new chance for him to break out all those old stories again, even though Will already knows every single one of them. And I agree that there is some kind of darkness to it. But I don't know. I disagree that it has an overbearing kind of sadness to it at all, because it is kind of like a memorial in a way of everything that he's done in his life, and he looks at it fondly. And it turns out that in the long run, his son does too. His son looks back and says, "Okay, these stories describe my dad well, I think." So I didn't feel the darkness so much.
Okay, a couple of thoughts on that. So I learned after watching the movie that this is directed by Tim Burton.
Mm-hmm.
Does not have the standard Tim Burton look and feel, except for maybe a couple of little parts which we can talk about. But I learned that Tim Burton's dad died in the year 2000.
Oh.
So shortly before they started producing this movie. And so I I totally know that had an effect on
Oh,
how this
absolutely.
was portrayed. This is a grieving thing, and maybe that's where I sense that sadness in it. So I do love that he's telling the stories to Will's wife, whose name I can't remember. Do you have
Josephine.
Josephine? Yes, she's French, and she's never heard these before, and she's listening and enjoying it, but keeps pointing out apparent inconsistencies
Mm-hmm.
in his stories. And of course, he's got a story to explain away that inconsistency. And it gives you the feeling of this guy who's so well versed in selling that he's like, oh, he can come up with anything on the fly. I love the fact that at the end, we kind of learn that they weren't lies.
Not entirely, at least.
Right. Exaggerations, tall
Yeah.
tales, but based in the truth. And so I do love that dynamic between Josephine and the old Edward. I think that works really well.
Yeah. And, well, Edward was a door-to-door salesman, essentially.
Right.
And so that was what he did. He had to have those stories, and he had to have something to convince people of things, whether he's selling a robotic hand for the Handymatic, or he's trying to convince them of a story that he met people. Well, the scene where he was dropped down into Korea, China,
North Korea.
North Korea.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that was. I mean, you got to sell that, and that's what he was. He was a salesman, and his stories were just part of the deal.
Okay, that was the one story where I didn't get off board of the movie. I was like, okay, the giant, sure, this strange ghostly town in Alabama, sure, but the whole North Korea scene where he parachutes into like a stage show and there's a conjoined twins, it's just too much for me. That one part. And so after that I was like, all right, where are we going now? As funny as it was too far over the top for me.
I think that's why this movie exists. Just kind of go over the top and just like every single thing. Like the depressed giant who like, I'm just hungry all the time. I don't want to eat you, but that's just what I have to do. And all the circus, the big ring guy, or Danny DeVito's character, who's actually a werewolf. So there's just so much over the topness that, yeah, the North Korea thing was goofy, but it fit into the story in a way, I guess.
Yeah, okay. I see that. I did really like, my favorite part was the journey through the forest on the back road that ended him in the town of Spectre, with the jumping spiders and the hornets, and because that's the first time it really brings up the idea, the meaning for what it would mean for Edward to know how he was going to die. You know, he saw his death in the witch's eye at the very beginning. Because if you know, you also know how you're not going to die. And so that idea that he was able to have all these adventures because he knew this is not how I die. I really liked that. And the whole thing in Spectre, once he gets there, is just so funny. Steve Buscemi as the poet who's been working on a poem for 12 years. And it's like, I should be able to remember it. Sky is so blue, grass so green, Spectre is great.
Yeah. This is why you don't show people a work in progress.
Yeah. So that whole part it goes on a little bit long, I think. Feel like, where he goes to the water and, you know, sees this beautiful naked woman swimming around who's actually a fish or something.
Yeah.
But I did really like that whole sequence from the forest to the city to the town of Spectre.
Speaking of Steve Buscemi's character, I love his progression throughout the movie. Although you don't see him that much, he progresses from the poet laureate of his hometown, and then of Spectre, which obviously he was never any good at it, to robbing banks, and then getting a lesson from Edward along the way. And he says, "Oh, that's how money works. So I'm going to go to the stock market. I'm going to go to Wall Street," and then he becomes a millionaire there. So his progression throughout the movie is pretty hilarious to me.
Yeah, the parallel between a bank robber and a Wall Street broker is pretty on the nose. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, but it's like all the fun characters along the way. They're okay. So I'm a big fan of Danny DeVito in general. He plays a lot of roles that I have really liked. I used to watch pretty regularly. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and his portrayal of Frank Reynolds is one of my favorite characters of all time. Um, and so his character here, I think, is not one of his best, but he's still so good, and he just does. He's just so Danny DeVito, and no matter what he does, he's always to the same some extent the same character. And yeah,
Do you know the words involuntary servitude? How about
no,
unconscionable contract? Oh,
never heard
perfect.
it.
Sign here. Yeah. that was pretty good. I think my favorite role of his has got to be as Matilda's father in the movie Matilda.
That's a good one
Back
as
from the
well.
late 90s, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Or what about the Penguin in Batman 2? That's another
Another
role.
Tim Burton movie, which
Yeah.
we have not revisited yet,
No.
but we might, because it may be on like it probably made a lot of money too at some point, right?
I'm sure it did. Yeah, so it might
Yeah,
be on
we'll
our
have
list.
to check.
Yeah. But my only question about Danny DeVito's character is after he turns into a werewolf and he tries to kill Edward in the movie, and then the next morning Edward finds him naked in the forest, and he finally convinces, or Edward finally gets the information he needs from him about his future wife, and there's the scene right before it ends with him is he's using his foot to scratch his face because he's still a werewolf to some extent. And my question is, I wonder whose foot that actually is. Like,
You didn't watch in the credits?
did you?
No.
Oh, because I wonder, like, or if it was like a prosthetic foot. But I just thought, who had to play the role of scratching their foot against Danny DeVito's face for this movie?
Yeah, because sorry, there's just no way that he's that flexible. So it was
No.
definitely not his foot.
Yeah, that was made me laugh as we were watching that. But
So let's talk about Sandra,
okay,
Edward's wife, who finally he learns from Danny DeVito that she likes daffodils, that she's going to college, a couple other things.
yeah,
And after 3 years, he finally reveals her name and that she's going to Auburn.
yes,
And so Edward goes down to Auburn and meets his future wife for the first time. What did you think about that whole relationship between the two of them?
it's very fitting for Edward, I think, because he does everything like 100% all the time, and so to go down there knowing that he was going to marry this woman, he was going to do everything he possibly could within his power to make it happen, and bringing in thousands and thousands of daffodils after first meeting her, that's just what Edward would do. I did like the throwback to the visions they had in The Witch's Eye, and how that related back to, well, you knew it was coming once the other characters that saw how he was going to die, which I believe his name was Bill.
Bill Price, yep.
Yeah, Bill Price. Yeah, he saw how he was going to die at the same time that Edward saw in The Witch's Eye how he was going to die. And Bill Price just happened to be dating or engaged to Sandra, Edward's future wife. And so knowing how he was going to die, you think he would have taken some precautions a little bit, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't think about it, I guess.
Well, Edward always was, it seemed like.
True. So for me, the Sandra Edward relationship was the real emotional heart of the movie. I think for Tim Burton and for the movie itself, it tries to make it the Will Edward, the father son relationship. But I think what spoke to me the most was this like destined love and marriage between Sandra and Edward. And it was really touching. I loved the scene with the thousands of daffodils, and you just see Edward standing. The whole screen is daffodils,
Yeah.
and Edward standing there in the middle of it. And it's just really heartfelt and touching to me. And you see a scene right at the end where Edward, instead of standing in a field of daffodils, is in a bathtub trying to just, you know, be comfortable as he's dying of cancer, and Sandra climbs into the bathtub with him. Is For me, those were the most touching parts to see their relationship grow and change over the years.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, when Will is off talking with Jenny, who is also the witch, that whole scenario is kind of weird to me. But I mean, the whole movie's weird. But when he's off talking to her, and Jenny says, "There's only ever been two people in Edward's life, Sandra and everyone else." I feel like that kind of sums up their relationship. Is like nothing else matters to him except his wife. And you're right. That is really emotional and powerful.
Yeah, that really worked for me. Interestingly, Sandra, older Sandra, was played by Jessica Lange,
Yep.
who I believe won her first Oscar as a supporting actress in the 1982 movie Tootsie,
Oh, it's
which we're going
exciting.
to be discussing on our very next episode. So it was weird. I watched those movies almost back to back, and I was like, wait a minute, Jessica Lange again?
She did not win any awards for this one, unfortunately. Well,
No,
nobody
she was
did.
good. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody was. Well, Will was probably my least favorite, to be honest.
Yeah, I almost felt like that character was forced quite a bit. Like, this was Edward's story, and I get the whole father son relationship, but I felt like his character was kind of forced in there and not really. It wasn't until the very last scene of the movie that he played any kind of role, I felt like.
Yeah, that last scene is, well, then maybe the next to last scene where Will tells the final story
Yeah,
to Edward, and that one worked for me too. I don't know that the rest of the movie had earned it,
that's fair enough.
but I did enjoy that one where he brings back in all these characters from his dad's stories, and they're all there. Well, Edward dies but turns into a fish.
It's
It was
fitting.
fitting.
Yeah, it's fitting, and I mean, I knew that scene was coming, but it's for me, it's obviously really emotional. Just all the people getting there and celebrating Edward's life, and his son being the one that finally gets to experience all the stories that coming together at the end. Because Edward or Will, his son, knew all these stories so well. That's why he was able to tell this final story and bring all the parts together and make it just this happy moment for Edward. And Edward knew Edward knew that's how he was going to die the whole
Mm-hmm.
time. And so to have his son be there, even though Will didn't really play a role in any part of any Edward stories, but yeah, it's an emotional scene, and I think for me, it was the most powerful scene, and the reason that is not just because of the emotions, but the lighting of the scene, how it turns from
Oh.
this really dark scene where they're sitting in the hospital together, and Will starts telling the story, and it just lights up. This is Will finally getting into his dad's story and realizing it's not about all these lies that my dad's been telling this whole time. It's about his life and all his what actually happened in his life. And even if he was making up these big stories, he still led an amazing life, a really fun-filled life, and I think Will finally gets into that, and the lighting just changes completely, and it makes sense to me.
I didn't notice that, and I wish I would have picked up on that. I may have to go back. Oh, I already took the DVD back to the library. Well, I may
Well,
have to try to get it again and watch for that.
it reminded me a little bit of the lighting when he walked into Spectre the first time, because it went from the dark, dark forest to, oh, here's this amazing hidden little place in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, it kind of had the same lighting change.
Just glows with that warm light. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, can I talk about the actual very final scene a little bit?
Yes, please do.
To me, that was the one that brought home kind of the darkness and the tragedy of it. So they go to Edward's funeral, and all these characters in their actual human forms rather than their exaggerated forms are there. right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We see Danny DeVito. We see the giant. He's tall, but he's not like 30 feet tall. We see the conjoined twins. They're just regular twins.
Yeah.
We see the people from the town of Spectre. We see Steve Buscemi. There's the Wall Street guy now. Why weren't these people in Edward's life before? Like, why did Will not know them? And that's the sad part to me. So these are obviously really important things that happened in his father's life, but his father never shared them with his family in any real way. And so there's this idea for me that all of Edward's actual life was hidden from his son. And that to me strikes me as really sad.
I mean, you're absolutely right. The fact that Will thought all of these stories were lies the whole time. I mean, yeah, there was lies built into them, but there was some truth behind them as well. And yeah, you're absolutely right that these characters actually existed, but they weren't part of his life. Outside of these stories that Will just assumed were all lies. So, yeah, it makes you wonder a little bit. Like, did he not want Will, his own child, in his life? Did he want to keep things so separate that it only was told through stories instead of actual experiences? Because they obviously cared enough to be there at the funeral, and they still cared enough about Edward. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just left me with a feeling of the ineffableness of our parents, right? Like, the movie seems to be saying there's no way you can understand what your parents' life was like until it's too late. And that feels really appropriate for someone whose father just died, I would say. But also, it left me feeling sad rather than happy at the end of this movie.
Yeah, and I don't know if I felt happy at the end. I definitely was filled with emotion. There might have been some tears from both my wife and I as we watched it, because I mean, it is someone passing at the end. You know it's coming, but it's not a necessarily happy thing. But that now that you mention this, like, thinking of our own dad, I don't know any of the people that were in his life before. Really?
Well, we're going to have him as a guest on the podcast.
Maybe we will. But I think that to some extent that's true of most people and their parents. Like, they'll never really know my friends from college, or I mean, that's the same kind of time period that we're talking about for Edward here, those
right.
few years after high school. My kids won't know those people. They were experiences I had in life. They'd probably come to my funeral if I had one. Wait, I do plan to have one probably, but not anytime soon. But I think that you're right. It does speak to that. Just kind of kept that part of his life separate, which I think everybody does to some extent.
Right. Yeah. Maybe there's no way to avoid that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can never really know somebody in that, but having those fake stories there is kind of almost a roadblock.
Yeah.
There's a hiding behind those fake stories. But I don't know. That's just where I landed.
Maybe they weren't fake stories to Edward. Maybe, as things get farther away from when they actually happened, stories get bigger, or you can't quite remember all the details, so you just kind of have to wing it a little bit.
Oh, I definitely know how that works. Don't fact check me when I talk about any of the things that I remember on this podcast. Speaking of which, pause here for a fact check and correction from our previous episode on 1982 top sellers. In my location-based band Countdown,
oh no,
I said that Nazareth's best song was Love Stinks, and that's not correct. Love Stinks is a Jay Giles band song.
Oof.
Nazareth's song is Love Hurts, which is also a good song. I think that's probably their best one, but I said the wrong thing. Love Hurts, and you can tell from when you watch this movie that love hurts.
Yes, that could have been the theme here. So, weird connection here. Well, no, not even that weird. You know who Harry Chapin is?
The singer?
Yeah, okay,
Musician?
So you do. Yeah. This song, his probably one most famous song, came to mind watching this movie. Cats in the Cradle. Just the whole theme of a father and son never really getting to connect, I think fits perfectly with this movie. It obviously wasn't in the movie, but it came to mind as I was watching it. Like, slightly different concept, but a father and son never really getting the time to be together and connect on anything, really.
Yes. And can I make a comment about what a pissy little baby Will was on his freaking wedding day to walk out because his dad was telling a story? I'm like, come on, dude. That's pathetic.
That was a little sad. I understand that he had a weird relationship with his dad, and his dad tried to take over and make things about him. That's how Will felt, at least. So yeah.
Yeah,
But
I guess I sort of get it, but come on. I don't remember anything from my wedding, hardly. Like,
me
I was
neither.
paying so little attention to what was going on around me.
Yeah, there was just kind of like a blur. That's all I remember as well. All right. Change the topic here real quick. I also had to connect this to The Office because Bill Price is played by the same character or same actor that plays Roy on The Office.
Yep.
And ends up with essentially the exact same fate as Roy from The Office, where engaged to kind of the beautiful woman or the girl, and then another guy steps in and he beats him up, but then bad things happen and he ends up lonely again or dead in this scenario.
Well, yeah. It's I love this actor. I don't remember his name. Do you have his name?
I didn't write that one down.
We typecast actors, right? And this guy just has a really punchable face.
David Denman.
He's a great actor, but like, there's just something about the way he looks that makes you root against him, and I don't know why. He just looks smarmy and smug, and like, ugh, I don't like this guy. So, I mean, he's obviously successful. Most actors never get a chance to do a role even as big as the one in Big Fish, let alone a major character on a long-running sitcom. But hats off to you, David, for being willing to play these roles, because that's what you kind of look like. Again, no offense, man. I'm glad you're as successful as you are when you eventually listen to this podcast when we become huge stars.
Yeah, someday down the line, yeah. But yeah, so at one point I expected Dwight to jump out with a can of pepper spray and get him, but it was the Playboy on the toilet that ended up getting him in this one.
They didn't even spill a big pot of chili anywhere in this whole movie.
I can't believe it. Yeah. So, I mean, I enjoyed this movie. I remember it being one of the first movies I watched with my wife, and having that connection made it more special to me. And so it's definitely not one of the best movies of 2003 for like accolades or anything like that, but it is a memorable one for me that I really enjoy.
Yeah, this is the second Tim Burton movie we've talked about on our podcast, right? So we talked about 1989's Batman. Is it our... I think it's just a second.
Okay. All right.
I think we referenced Beetlejuice, but we didn't talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And if I remember right, one of the things I really enjoyed about the Batman movie, even though I didn't like it overall, is the visuals. Tim Burton's visual imagination, that you see it there in Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, all of his early movies. And this one, for the most part, seemed to lack that Tim Burton style. There's one scene that I think had it where Edward goes to Jenny's house and it's dilapidated and crooked and falling down, and you see these angular architectural things and everything's all kind of just a little bit unreal. Doesn't look quite right. And then the giant, of course, comes and pushes the house upright. And I love the way that scene looks. But other than that, it's almost a normal movie rather than a Tim Burton movie.
I think I do agree the visuals aren't quite as striking in this one as some of the other ones, but I think there's a few other scenes as well that kind of feel Tim Burton-esque. When he is walking through the dark forest to get to Spectre, or is it when he's leaving? One of the times when the trees are like bending in and attacking him.
Okay, yeah.
I felt like that was a very Tim Burton-esque scene. The scene where the flash flood hits and his car ends up in the tree. That's another one. It's a weird scene, obviously, but I felt like there was a few spread throughout. Definitely not as many as Batman and the kind of overall theme. I think this one, each part of the story was kind of so separate that you couldn't have one running visual theme throughout it. So you needed lots of different things, and maybe not as striking as other ones, but I felt like it still felt like Tim Burton.
That's fair. It was basically a same size of hit as most of his movies. Made double the budget and perfectly successful. Yeah. I think it's probably his most personal movie.
Yeah, knowing the history of his father passing shortly before that, yeah, I could definitely feel that for him.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to give this movie a grade, what would you give it?
I gave it a B-. It's good enough that I would recommend it, but I didn't love it.
I guess I just have a more emotional connection to it. Just I feel like it, not that it played a huge role in my life or anything, but this was my pick, and so it's obviously one that I liked more than you probably. And so I gave it an A-, just because I like the tall tale. I like the fun characters. Even if it does have some sad overtones to it, it's an enjoyable movie, and it was pretty well put together as well. I thought the lighting was really astounding, I felt like, throughout the movie. So that added to the effect for me.
So tell me a little bit more about the history of you watching this movie for the first time.
So I think I remember watching it back in like 2003 or 2004, and enjoying it. But then I watched it. My wife watched it for the first time with me shortly after, or a few years later, and I just remember feeling like an emotional connection as we watched the movie, and so it made it more special for me.
Yeah. So I wonder, because my favorite part was that husband-wife relationship between Edward and Sandra, and that if I would have watched this freshly married instead of freshly a parent, it would have hit differently.
It very well could have.
So yeah. I wonder if that's part of it.
It very well could be. It depends, your stage of life, and because there was all different stages of life in this movie, obviously, where as Edward traveled through his stories. So yeah, I could see that. That's definitely something to consider. So probably why I liked it more.
This was certainly a fun one to talk about. I'm glad you chose this one, because without this, I probably never would have revisited it.
There's a lot of movies out there that I'm probably never going to watch again. So it's fun to pick out one that has some meaning and to go back to it again.
Yeah, I went to the library yesterday looking for a couple of movies. So our next episode, we're talking about the award winners from 1982. And the 4 movies we're talking about were all nominated for Best Picture, right? Gandhi, Tootsie, The Verdict, and Missing.
Mm-hmm.
So I watched all those.
Oh, wow. You're ahead of me.
And then I looked up what else came out in 1982. There's all these other good movies that came out in 1982. So even I'm going beyond, and like I'm on a 1982 kick. And so I went to the library yesterday to try to find Victor Victoria, which had a couple of Oscar noms. And I'm looking at the stack, but the spines are facing away to me. I can't remember the other 1982 movie I found, but I ended up coming home with 5 DVDs.
Oh, wow.
Because it took me forever to find Victor Victoria. It's a drama.
Isn't it under the
comedy?
Is it in the V section of the videos?
No.
What?
Because the official title is Blake Edwards Victor Victoria, so it was under B. So I'm looking through the entire rack of DVDs and Blu-rays at the library, like thinking they have to have this. I checked on my computer beforehand that it was in stock at the Westover Branch Library. So after like 10 minutes and finding several other movies, I was like, oh, this one looks good. I've never seen this. I'll check this one out too. I finally had to go onto my phone and look it up in the catalog and see that it was under Blake.
Oh, that's good.
But yeah, I'm excited to talk about 1982.
Yeah, you're ahead of me in this game because I haven't watched any of the award winners or the nominations yet. But I have started the book now, so we can get to that eventually, obviously. But
Yeah, I've got 4 hours of driving
oh, that's
back
right.
and forth to see my son for his birthday tonight. So I'm going to check out the audiobook. I've read about a quarter of it on my Kindle, and I'll switch to audiobook for the drive and then back to Kindle. So, I should be able to finish it. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. I don't want to spoil anything, but I won't spoil anything about the movies either, but I'm on a 1982 kick, so maybe that
I think
reveals a little bit.
I think as we do this more, we're gonna realize just how many good movies there are every single year, and
Yeah.
and we're not ever gonna be able to watch all of them, obviously. But it's fun to see. Oh, that's from this year. What? I should watch that one again, even though it's not on our list. So sounds like that's what you're already doing.
Yes. The books are, I think, continue to be the hard part because they take a
Yeah.
lot longer to read a book. I was looking through our randomized list of years coming up. I think about 12 down the list, 12 or 13 down the list is 1973. And the National Book Award winner for fiction that year is Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow.
Oh no.
So I think I might just have to start reading that now if I want to be able to finish it in the next 14 months.
Isn't it like 1,200 pages or something like
It
that?
is. I've never gotten farther in than about 150.
Oh boy. We there might be some exceptions made. We'll see.
I'll just get the Spark Notes.
Do those still exist? I don't know. I've been so far out of cult.
I would assume so. I don't know. Or just ask AI to create us a summary of Gravity's Rainbow.
Oh boy.
With books like that, the great thing is that very few people have read them. So you can just say whatever you want about it and nobody's going to fact check you because they're like, he might be
true.
right. I don't know.
Our target audience is people who have not read this book. In general.
So like 99%, 99.5% of everyone. Yeah. Got a good target here.
Anybody under 60 essentially. All right. Well, it's 2003 wrapped up for us essentially.
Yeah, thanks for bringing in Big Fish for our bonus episode.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Maybe not as much fun for you as it was for me, but that's okay.
And we'll be back next time with our look at 1982's award-winning movies, music, and book.
See you then, guys.
Bye.